and CDE. A few months ago, as some of you know, I was invited to speak on a panel at the Brooklyn Public Library on the future of Jewish life in our borough. And after about an hour of my co-presenters and I exploring the different factions of Jews in Brooklyn and all the ways in which we're different from one another, and sometimes don't like each other, the moderator asked us if we had unlimited money, what would we spend it on? What would we spend it on that would ensure the future of the collective Jewish community? When it was my turn to speak, I offered that I'd spend it all on therapy. Perhaps some of you might agree. That panel reminded me of what I already knew, which is that we are a funky, quirky people with a lot of issues, mostly with each other. And while Jewish neuroticism and disagreement and a fondness for therapy are all tired cliches, it does seem useful to analyze how we got here, to dig deep into prior generations of Jewish life so we can better understand how we can live meaningfully and healthfully as Jews today. Now, with or without a trained psychologist, in our pursuit of a worthwhile Jewish present, we should probably analyze the good, the bad, and the ugly of our collective past. This week's Torah portion, Vayeira, might be a good starting point. Not only is it almost at the very beginning of the Jewish story, it's one of the sections of Genesis most jam-packed with iconic biblical drama. And at times it reads less like a sacred text and more like an episode of The Real Housewives of New Jersey. Sarah laughs at Abraham's inability to perform sexually, and God lies on her behalf. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah behave so sinfully that God seeks their destruction, and Lot, the only good guy in the story, ends up sleeping with both of his daughters and getting them pregnant. Come to think of it, Vayeira might actually be more scandalous than any of the Real Housewives franchises. It does have some redeeming moments, Abraham welcoming strangers and defending the lives of innocent people, but really no one gets off easy in this one. As is frequently the case in Genesis, we learn more about what not to do in our lives, which is perhaps another reason why there are almost no mitzvot in the book of Genesis. And the character who features most prominently through this lens is Abraham's nephew, Lot. Though Lot is more patriarch adjacent than a patriarch himself, his example is useful for us as we explore our own mythic and real ancestry. God singles out Lot for salvation, and things start strong for him. At the beginning of chapter 19, when two angels in Sodom approach Lot, he responds in a manner almost identical to his uncle Abraham in the chapter before it. He greets them and bows down. He invites them over to his house to wash their feet and prepare them a meal. As the Midrash in Genesis Rabbi explains, Lot is trying to follow Abraham's example, welcoming the stranger. But unlike his uncle, Lot goes a little too far. When the townspeople of Sodom come knocking on his door, demanding him to hand over his guests so that they can join in their orgy, Lot refuses to do so. At which point he thinks for a moment and comes up with a solution, albeit probably not the best one. You can't have my house guests, Lot says. How about you try my daughters? At that moment, we all kind of let out a collective, oh, it's really not the right thing for him to have done. But we might be relieved to learn that the medieval commentators also disliked this as much as we do. Ramban puts it succinctly. What starts as praise for Lot, his generosity, results in his disgrace. His behavior bespeaks nothing but an evil spirit because it shows that the matter of mistreating women was not repugnant to him. Now, I'm not convinced that Ramban is 100% right, that Lot has an evil heart. But I agree that Lot puts little stock in the value of women. And on this subject, Ramban unwittingly gives us a clue about Lot's actual mistake in this parsha. In last week's Parsha, when Abraham lies to Pharaoh and says that Sarah is his sister and not his wife, Ramban teaches that Abraham sinned a great sin, throwing Sarah under the bus to save himself. And while surely Abraham was a paragon of hospitality, he was quick to reduce the value of a woman, which, even for our classical medieval commentators, was a misstep. Perhaps then, Lot's mistake was that he was overzealous in mimicking Abraham. He followed his example, this example, in addition to the good ones, instead of questioning the behaviors of Abraham and perhaps even the rest of his forebears. He went too far in copying Abraham. Now, frequently when we read this Parsha, we focus on the moment when Abraham stands up to God, defending the innocent minority of Sodom and Gomorrah. We typically read it as an example of critiquing authority and standing up for what's right. But Lot in this Parsha sharpens the lesson, teaching us that among the powers to which we must speak truth, our parents and earlier generations cannot evade our scrutiny and critique. And this is partially where some collective psychoanalysis could be useful for us. Though we may be inclined to follow the example of our ancestors, always, each generation must also learn from their prior mistakes. This lesson actually also appears in the story of Lot's daughters, as they flee Sodom with their father after their mother has transformed into a pillar of salt, famously. They hatch a scheme to get their father drunk so that they can conceive children with him. All of this, maybe I'm guessing some of you know, but it's really there. It's really in our text. Let us sleep with him, they say, unchaye me'avinu zara, so that we may maintain life through our father. Another midrash in Genesis Rabbi explains that Lot's daughters believed that they were in fact the last humans on earth. Like Noah and his family, they thought they were destined to repopulate not only the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, but the entire world. And therefore, when they say that they intend to maintain life through their father, they mean that they believe it's their role to follow the example of Noah's family and repopulate the earth, necessitate that they conceive children with their dad. Intriguingly, they missed the earlier part where Noah also ends his life in disgrace after getting blackout drunk himself. Nonetheless, the daughters of Lot believed that they were doing the right thing, following the examples of their forebears. But like their father, they went too far. And also like him, they didn't interrogate what was good or bad about their ancestors' behaviors. With these episodes and so many others, Genesis presents a masterclass in how one generation's mistakes inevitably bleed into the next. After Abraham binds Isaac to an altar and tries to kill him, is it really any surprise that Isaac isn't an especially well-adjusted father himself? Perhaps if Isaac had sought professional help, the whole Jacob and Esau story would have ended differently. Intriguingly, in an earlier commentary on Genesis, Ramban teaches something important, particularly as it relates to our eternal Jewish desire for psychoanalysis. He explains that when we read the stories of patriarchs and matriarchs, we need to keep in mind the famous rabbinic dictum of Ma'aseh Avot Siman L'Banim. The behaviors of the parents are a symbol for the children. In other words, what happens in one generation always affects the one that succeeds it. That's always true. But according to our sages, that's especially true when it comes to the stories of Abraham and Sarah and the generations that come after. Whether we like it or not, our tradition implies that we as Jews, as the children of Abraham and Sarah, are destined to replay many of our ancestors' narratives. And if this is so, then we learn from Lot and we learn from Lot's daughters the important lesson of really interrogating the moments when we find ourselves repeating ancient scripts. If the Torah is our blueprint for what to do and how to live our lives, we might be inclined to follow every example we find therein. This week, Lot and his daughters remind us of an essential Jewish, rabbinic, and psychoanalytic lesson, that part of honoring our parents is diving into the past and grappling with it to live a life of blessing. We are well served when we treat Jewish memory with the same analysis in which we approach our own personal memories. And ultimately, if we are to live lives of integrity and meaning both as Jews and as human beings, we need to probe and analyze what we've inherited at least as much as we respect it. Shabbat Shalom.
We continue on page 144 with Chatzi Kaddish.